10 toughest actresses in Hollywood history. Hollywood's golden age shimmers with glamour and dreams. The sequins, the spotlights, the adoring fans. But behind those dazzling smiles and perfect poses existed a ruthless industry that chewed up talent and spit them out without a second thought. The women who not only survived but conquered this world weren't just beautiful or talented, they were forged of pure steel. Today, we're revealing the 10 toughest actresses in Hollywood history, women who faced down studio bosses, survived personal catastrophes, and rewrote the rules of an industry designed to control them. These weren't performers who merely played strong women on screen. They lived it every single day in a business that constantly tested their resolve. And number 4 on our list, let's just say it will shatter everything you thought you knew about one of America's most beloved icons. The sweet facade that hid a will of iron might be the most shocking revelation of all. These legendary women didn't just deal with the Hollywood machine, they mastered it, transformed it, and left it forever changed in their wake. What does it really mean to be tough in Hollywood? It's not just about enduring hardship or standing up to bullies, though our actresses certainly did plenty of both. True toughness in this industry means something deeper, the relentless courage to be yourself when everyone demands you change, the strength to get back up after devastating setbacks, and the sheer audacity to challenge a system explicitly designed to keep women in their place. The actresses we're about to meet didn't just survive Hollywood, they redefined what was possible for women in entertainment, often at enormous personal cost. Their stories reveal not just the glamorous facade we all know, but the gritty reality behind it, and the extraordinary women who refused to break no matter what challenges they faced.
Julie!
Who is it?
1. Bette Davis, the original Hollywood warrior. When people talk about toughness in Hollywood, one name inevitably comes first: Bette Davis. With those penetrating eyes and that razor-sharp delivery, Davis wasn't just acting when she portrayed formidable women, she was channeling her authentic self. But her legendary status as Hollywood's toughest actress wasn't earned through on-screen performances alone. It was forged in her relentless battles against a studio system that tried and failed to control her. In 1936, at the height of her initial fame, Davis did something that left Hollywood gasping. She sued Warner Brothers, her own studio. In an era when studios owned actors through ironclad contracts, this was considered career suicide. But Davis, frustrated by being forced into mediocre roles that wasted her talents, took the extraordinary step of flying to England to make films outside her contract. Jack Warner, the notoriously ruthless studio head, was livid. He not only sued her in return, but used his considerable influence to blacklist her in England. Temporarily defeated, Davis returned to America, but not before establishing herself as someone who would risk everything for her artistic integrity. "I survived because I was tougher than anyone expected and meaner than they deserved," Davis once remarked about this period. The lawsuit ultimately failed in court, but it succeeded in a far more important way. Warner Brothers began offering her better roles, recognizing that Davis wasn't just another compliant starlet. She was a force to be reckoned with. This battle with Warner wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout her career, Davis fought constantly for better scripts, for artistic control, for respect in an industry that routinely demeaned women. She famously feuded with Joan Crawford during the filming of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. But what many don't realize is that behind the scenes, Davis was fighting for both of them. When she discovered Crawford was being paid less, Davis demanded to know why, and advocated for her co-star despite their personal animosity. Davis's toughness extended to her approach to acting itself. Unlike many stars who protected their image at all costs, she eagerly took roles that required her to look ugly, old, or deranged if the part demanded it. In an industry obsessed with female beauty, this willingness to prioritize authenticity over vanity was its own kind of courage. Perhaps most telling were her relationships with directors. Davis would engage in legendary screaming matches with them over scene interpretations or character motivations, not out of ego, but from deep commitment to her craft. Director William Wyler, with whom she made 3 films, said working with Davis was like going over Niagara Falls in a barrel, yet he sought to work with her repeatedly because her fierce advocacy always served the film. What made Davis truly exceptional wasn't just her willingness to fight, but her refusal to be broken by the inevitable failures and setbacks. After the collapse of 4 marriages, health crises, including a devastating stroke, and periods when Hollywood declared her finished, Davis repeatedly rebuilt herself and returned stronger than before. As one longtime cameraman who worked with her put it, she didn't act tough, she was tough. In a town built on illusion, Bette Davis's toughness was perhaps the most authentic thing in Hollywood.
How are you, Lily?
It was great up to now.
2. Barbara Stanwyck, Steel Wrapped in Silk. If Hollywood had created a fictional character with Barbara Stanwyck's real-life story, critics would have dismissed it as too melodramatic to be believable. Orphaned at age 4 when her mother was pushed from a moving streetcar, shuttled through foster homes, and working full-time by age 14, Stanwyck didn't just overcome adversity, she was practically forged by it. Unlike many actresses who were discovered for their beauty, Stanwyck fought her way into entertainment through sheer force of will, starting as a chorus girl and gradually working her way into speaking roles. By the time she reached Hollywood, she already possessed something most actresses took years to develop, an unshakable confidence in her own resilience. This background made Stanwyck uniquely unsuited to the traditional studio system's attempts at control. When executives tried to change her name, suggesting Barbara Stanfield as more elegant, she flatly refused. When costume designers wanted to pad her modest bust to create a more glamorous silhouette, she told them to work with what she had or find someone else. In an era when actresses were expected to be decorative and compliant, Stanwyck was neither. What truly set Stanwyck apart, however, was her approach to the actual work of filmmaking. At a time when most female stars were preoccupied with looking beautiful on camera, Stanwyck focused on the craft itself with almost masculine intensity. She was famously the most prepared person on any set, arriving with lines memorized not just for her role, but for every character in the scene. This workmanlike approach extended to stunts as well. Unlike most leading ladies who were carefully protected from any physical risk, Stanwyck routinely performed her own stunts, including dangerous horseback riding sequences that left male co-stars impressed and stunt coordinators nervous. When asked why she insisted on doing her own physical work, she simply replied, "I couldn't expect someone else to take risks I wouldn't take myself." Perhaps most revealing was her reputation among film crews, the cameramen, lighting technicians, and stagehands who saw stars at their worst and best. While many actresses of the era were notorious for tantrums and demands, crew members universally adored Stanwyck. They gave her a nickname that perfectly captured her essence: Steel Wrapped in Silk. This combination of toughness and consideration extended to her business dealings as well. By the 1940s, Stanwyck had negotiated an extraordinary status in Hollywood, working as an independent contractor rather than under long-term studio control. This arrangement, almost unheard of for actresses at the time, allowed her to choose her projects and command higher fees. More impressively, she achieved this without the spectacular public battles that characterized Bette Davis's career. Stanwyck simply outlasted and outmaneuvered the studio bosses with quiet, relentless determination. Her personal life revealed the same steely core. When her marriage to actor Robert Taylor collapsed, she handled the divorce with characteristic privacy and dignity. There were no public accusations, no tearful interviews, just a woman moving forward with her life and career intact. As one studio executive remarked after dealing with her, the only thing sharper than her cheekbones was her spine. In an industry that routinely discarded actresses as they aged, Stanwyck remained relevant for decades, seamlessly transitioning to television when film roles became scarcer. Her final major role came in the 1980s hit series The Colbys, when she was nearly 80 years old. In a business infamous for chewing up and spitting out talent, Barbara Stanwyck didn't just survive, she triumphed on her own unapologetic terms.
Somebody, a friend of mine called someone. She said to me, "How do I feel?" I said, "Oh, I'm all right." She said, "I called a friend of mine and said, how do you feel?"
3. Katharine Hepburn, the Magnificent Rebel. When Katharine Hepburn arrived in Hollywood in 1932, studio executives didn't know what to make of her. With her angular features, athletic build, and that distinctive voice, described by one critic as sounding as if she had swallowed a rusty nail, Hepburn defied every conventional standard of feminine appeal. Add to this her habit of wearing pants instead of dresses, refusing to wear makeup off-set, and openly challenging directors, and it's little wonder that within a few years, theater owners were labeling her box office poison. Any ordinary actress facing such rejection would have capitulated, softened her image, adopted more feminine mannerisms, played the studio publicity game. Hepburn did exactly the opposite. She doubled down on her authenticity with a defiance that now seems almost unimaginable. The pivotal moment came after a string of commercial failures in the late 1930s. Rather than accepting the studio's diminished opinion of her worth, Hepburn bought out her contract and returned to the stage, starring in The Philadelphia Story. When the play became a huge hit, she acquired the film rights herself, then sold them to MGM with non-negotiable conditions. She would star, and she would have approval over the director and her co-stars. It was an extraordinary power play that transformed her from box office poison to Oscar contender overnight. This pattern of refusing to comply with Hollywood's expectations defined Hepburn's entire career. When RKO Pictures initially tried to glamorize her, she subverted their efforts by tearing holes in her expensive stockings. When studio heads complained about her pants wearing, she reportedly responded by removing them and walking around the lot in her underwear, saying she'd put her pants back on when they stopped bothering her about them. Her independence extended to her personal life as well. Despite a 26-year relationship with Spencer Tracy, she never pushed him to divorce his wife or formalize their relationship with marriage. She never had children, never cared about domestic pursuits, and never apologized for prioritizing her career, choices that were considered almost heretical for women of her generation. Perhaps most revealing was her approach to the Hollywood publicity machine. At a time when studios carefully controlled their stars' public images, Hepburn simply refused to play along. She didn't give interviews unless she wanted to. She didn't attend premieres. She didn't sign autographs. And when the press criticized her for it, she famously responded, "I don't care what is written about me so long as it isn't true." This unwavering self-possession came at a cost. Hepburn was frequently described as difficult, arrogant, and unlikable. Yet she never wavered in her conviction that her integrity was worth any professional penalty. As she told one studio head who was pressuring her to conform, "Take me or leave me, but I'll be here when you're gone." She was right. The studio bosses who tried to tame her have been largely forgotten, while Hepburn's legacy only continues to grow. Her record for Academy Awards for Best Actress remains unmatched, but her true victory was in proving that a woman could succeed on her own uncompromising terms. As one longtime Hollywood observer put it, she walked like a man and talked like she ran the place. In Katharine Hepburn's case, perhaps she did.
And I love my work, and the book is about three things. The love I have for my mother, of course my dad and brothers, the love for my profession, I was very fortunate to have that, and the love for my first teacher.
4. Shirley Temple, the iron will behind the dimples. When you think of toughness in Hollywood, Shirley Temple's adorable face with those famous dimples probably isn't the first image that comes to mind. The child star who sang about the good ship Lollipop seems the antithesis of hard-edged determination, and that's precisely what makes the truth about Shirley Temple so shocking. Beneath those ringlets and behind that heartwarming smile existed one of the most formidable personalities Hollywood has ever produced. The conventional narrative about child stars is painfully familiar. Early success followed by exploitation, emotional damage, and often tragic adulthood. Temple's story shatters that pattern through a combination of extraordinary intelligence, unwavering boundaries, and a toughness few recognized until much later. From the beginning, Temple was no ordinary child performer. While most young actors were merely following directions, Shirley was actively co-creating her performances. By age 5, she could memorize a 35-page script after a single reading. She mastered complex dance routines more quickly than adult performers, and perhaps most remarkably, she developed an intuitive understanding of the filmmaking process itself, knowing exactly where the camera was, how to hit her marks, and how to modulate her performances for maximum effect. This wasn't just talent, it was a precocious professionalism that stunned veteran filmmakers. Director Alan Dwan, who worked with Temple on Heidi, later remarked, "Shirley was not a child actress. She was an actress who happened to be a child." But Temple's extraordinary qualities extended far beyond her performances. Even as a child, she displayed an uncanny ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Hollywood. When adult actors attempted to upstage her, a common occurrence with jealous performers, she would calmly adjust her positioning to reclaim her rightful place in the frame. When directors tried to coax additional takes through manipulation, she would politely but firmly call out their tactics. Most importantly, Temple somehow maintained her psychological boundaries in an industry notorious for destroying young performers. Unlike virtually every other child star of her era, she emerged from her early fame remarkably well-adjusted, a feat that becomes even more impressive when you consider what we now know about the predatory nature of the studio system. In a 2015 posthumous revelation that shocked many, Temple's autobiography detailed an incident when she was just 12. An MGM producer exposed himself to her during what was supposed to be a meeting about a film role. Instead of being traumatized into silence, the preteen Temple responded with composure and strength, laughing at him before walking out and telling her mother, who ensured she never worked with that producer. This early ability to establish and maintain boundaries served Temple well throughout her life. When her parents mismanaged much of her childhood earnings, leaving her with just $44,000 of the $3.2 million she had earned, she didn't collapse into victimhood. Instead, she rebuilt her finances through smart investments and business decisions. When her acting career naturally waned in adulthood, Temple didn't cling desperately to her child star identity. She reinvented herself completely, first as a prominent Republican fundraiser, then as a successful diplomat. As the U.S. ambassador to Ghana and later Czechoslovakia, she brought the same determination and intelligence to international relations that she had once brought to entertainment. Her diplomatic career revealed aspects of Temple's toughness that had always existed but rarely been visible to the public. In Ghana, she survived an assassination attempt. In Czechoslovakia, she navigated the complex politics of a nation emerging from communism with remarkable skill. In the United Nations, she spoke forcefully on environmental issues decades before they became mainstream concerns. Perhaps most telling was how Temple dealt with breast cancer in the 1970s. At a time when the disease was still spoken of in whispers, she held a press conference from her hospital room after her mastectomy, becoming one of the first prominent women to speak openly about breast cancer and helping to destigmatize the disease for countless others. From child star to diplomat, from cancer survivor to elder stateswoman, Shirley Temple Black demonstrated a resilience and strength that belied her sweet image. As one State Department colleague put it, she smiled on camera and took names off it. In the final analysis, Temple's toughness may be the most impressive of all the women on our list precisely because it was so carefully concealed. While other actresses made their strength part of their brand, Temple succeeded by hiding hers behind dimples and curls, then deploying it with precision exactly when needed.
But pictures made over there that we don't get to see over here, but he had made
5. Joan Crawford, the indomitable survivor. The mere mention of Joan Crawford's name evokes contradictory images. The glamorous star of Grand Hotel and Mildred Pierce, but also the wire hanger-wielding monster of Mommy Dearest. The truth, as always, is more complex than either extreme suggests. What remains undeniable, however, is Crawford's extraordinary toughness, a quality that propelled her from abject poverty to Hollywood royalty through sheer relentless will. Born Lucille LeSueur in San Antonio, Texas, Crawford's early life reads like a Victorian tragedy. Her father abandoned the family before she was born. Her mother's second husband allegedly abused young Lucille. By age 12, she was working as a domestic servant, scrubbing floors and toilets in exchange for room and board so she could attend school. The experience marked her permanently, creating both the fierce drive that propelled her forward and the obsessive cleanliness that would later become legendary. Crawford's path to stardom wasn't through family connections or exceptional beauty, it was through work. Brutal, unrelenting work. As a dancer in traveling shows, she would practice until her feet bled, then bandage them and practice more. When she finally reached Hollywood and secured a contract with MGM, she applied that same relentless work ethic to every aspect of her career, spending hours studying her angles on camera, mastering the technical aspects of lighting and photography, and transforming her appearance through sheer determination. What truly distinguished Crawford from her contemporaries was her remarkable ability to reinvent herself as times and tastes changed. When silent films gave way to talkies, Crawford, unlike many stars of the era, successfully made the transition through intensive voice training. When her dancing daughter flapper image became outdated, she transformed herself into a dramatic actress. When MGM dropped her contract in 1943, declaring her box office poison at age 38, Crawford engineered perhaps the most famous comeback in Hollywood history, winning an Oscar for Mildred Pierce just 2 years later. Behind these professional triumphs was a woman whose personal toughness bordered on the pathological. Crawford's legendary discipline extended to every aspect of her life. She rose at 4 a.m. to begin her beauty regimen before heading to the studio. She followed rigid diets and exercise routines decades before such practices were common. Her homes were maintained in a state of near military perfection, with cleanliness standards that terrorized household staff. This extreme self-discipline reflected Crawford's acute awareness of her precarious position. Unlike stars born into privilege, she never forgot her desperate beginnings. The poverty, the hunger, the vulnerability. Her ferocious drive was fueled by the determination never to return to those circumstances. Crawford's relationships with directors, co-stars, and studio executives were equally intense. She fought constantly for better roles, better treatment, and better pay, battles that earned her a reputation for being difficult. But as director Vincent Sherman noted, Joan wasn't difficult if you were prepared. She was only difficult if you weren't doing your job. This demanding approach extended to her infamous rivalries, particularly with Bette Davis. Yet even these conflicts revealed Crawford's strategic toughness. During the filming of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, when Davis had the showier role, Crawford found ways to draw attention back to herself, including wearing weights under her costume when Davis had to drag her across the floor, making the scene far more difficult for her co-star. Crawford's personal life was equally characterized by her unyielding nature. She adopted 5 children as a single mother in an era when such actions were highly unusual, then raised them with a regimen so strict it would later become the basis for her daughter Christina's scathing memoir. Whether the abuse allegations in Mommy Dearest are fully accurate remains debated, but even Crawford's defenders acknowledge she ran her household with iron determination. Perhaps most telling was Crawford's relationship with aging. In an industry that discarded women as they grew older, she fought against time with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. She maintained a punishing beauty regimen, underwent multiple cosmetic procedures, and continued playing romantic leads well into her 50s, often opposite men decades younger. When a director suggested she was too old for a role, Crawford didn't plead or negotiate. She set out to prove him wrong through sheer force of will. As one director who worked with her in her later years observed, she didn't chew scenery, she chewed people. It wasn't a compliment, but it might have been the most honest assessment of Crawford's ferocious determination to survive and succeed against any odds.
I didn't speak Italian. No one spoke Italian. But anyway, they knew they had to go barefoot, pull their skirts up and get in. They knew how to stomp grapes. They had done it.
6. Lucille Ball, the comedienne who built an empire. The world knows Lucille Ball as the wide-eyed, disaster-prone redhead from I Love Lucy, the comedic genius who could reduce audiences to helpless laughter with a well-timed grimace or a perfectly executed pratfall. But behind that beloved persona was a businesswoman of extraordinary toughness, vision, and determination, who not only starred in television's biggest hit, but also ran the studio that produced it. Ball's path to becoming Hollywood's most powerful woman began with years of frustration and rejection. Arriving in Hollywood in the 1930s, she spent over a decade being underutilized in B-movies and supporting roles. Studios saw her as just another pretty face, despite her persistent attempts to showcase her comedic talents. Less determined actresses would have accepted their limited opportunities or left the business entirely. Ball kept pushing, taking whatever roles she could get while constantly looking for opportunities to display her true abilities. The transformation from struggling actress to entertainment powerhouse came through Ball's relationship with Cuban bandleader Desi Arnaz. Their marriage was tumultuous, threatened by long separations due to their careers and by Arnaz's infidelities. But professionally, they were dynamite together. When CBS showed interest in bringing Ball's popular radio show My Favorite Husband to television, she insisted on casting her real-life husband as her co-star. CBS executives balked, doubting American audiences would accept an interracial couple. In response, Ball and Arnaz displayed the audacity that would come to define their business approach. They created their own vaudeville act, took it on the road to prove their appeal as a couple, and then used their own money to produce a pilot. The gamble worked spectacularly. I Love Lucy debuted in 1951 and quickly became television's most watched show. But Ball's true toughness emerged in the business decisions that followed. Together with Arnaz, she formed Desilu Productions, making her one of the first actors to take control of producing their own content. When Arnaz negotiated their contract with CBS, he included an unprecedented clause that gave Desilu ownership of the I Love Lucy episodes after their initial broadcast, a provision networks had never before granted, and one that eventually made Ball and Arnaz millions when the shows were rerun. The couple also insisted on shooting on film rather than the kinescope method common at the time, and on working in Hollywood instead of New York, decisions that required additional battles with the network but ultimately revolutionized television production techniques. Ball's insistence on these technical matters revealed a business acumen that few suspected lurked behind her comedic persona. Ball's toughness faced its greatest test in 1960 when she and Arnaz divorced after 20 years of marriage. Rather than allow the dissolution of their personal relationship to destroy their business, Ball took the extraordinary step of buying out her ex-husband's share of Desilu, becoming the first woman to head a major television studio. Under her leadership, Desilu took enormous creative risks, greenlighting innovative series that other studios had rejected as too expensive or too conceptually challenging. Among these gambles were Star Trek and Mission Impossible, shows that initially struggled in the ratings but eventually became cultural landmarks and multi-billion-dollar franchises. Throughout this period, Ball demonstrated a steely resolve that contradicted her scatterbrained on-screen character. She made difficult firing decisions when necessary, held firm in tough negotiations with networks, and maintained quality control over all Desilu productions. As one studio executive who often found himself on the opposite side of negotiations recalled, when Lucy made up her mind, that was it. She could fire a man twice her size without blinking, then go on camera and make America laugh 5 minutes later. Perhaps the most revealing moment in Ball's career came during the McCarthy era, when she was questioned about registering to vote as a communist in 1936, an action she had taken to please her grandfather. At a time when even the hint of communist sympathy could destroy an entertainment career, Ball faced the accusation head-on. She testified forthrightly before the House Un-American Activities Committee and then held a press conference in her home to answer questions directly from reporters. While other actors were blacklisted for similar or lesser charges, Ball's forthright approach and refusal to be intimidated allowed her to weather the crisis with her career intact. This combination of creative brilliance and business toughness made Ball unique in Hollywood history. As her longtime colleague put it, she built an empire in lipstick and heels. In doing so, she didn't just make people laugh, she permanently changed the power structure of television.
Part is in nature. If you have fallen in love with the character.
7. Mercedes McCambridge, The Velvet Hammer. Among classic Hollywood's tough women, Mercedes McCambridge might be the least immediately recognizable name to casual fans, but within the industry, her reputation for uncompromising strength was legendary. Described by Orson Welles as the world's greatest living radio actress, McCambridge brought a unique intensity to both her performances and her personal conduct, earning her the nickname The Velvet Hammer for her ability to deliver devastating impact with superficial smoothness. McCambridge's Hollywood journey began with an Academy Award for her very first film role in 1949's All the King's Men, an extraordinary debut that immediately established her as a formidable talent. Unlike many actresses who softened their images to broaden their appeal, McCambridge leaned into the qualities that made her distinctive: her deep, resonant voice, her unflinching portrayal of complex, often unsympathetic characters, and her refusal to conform to Hollywood's conventional standards of femininity. This refusal extended to every aspect of her public persona. In an era when actresses were expected to be unfailingly gracious and accommodating, McCambridge was blunt to the point of abrasiveness. She cursed freely in interviews, shocking for a woman of her generation. She smoked heavily and made no apologies for it, and she spoke with remarkable candor about her struggles with alcoholism at a time when celebrities carefully concealed such personal challenges. McCambridge's toughness was perhaps most evident in how she handled sexual harassment, an endemic problem in Hollywood that most actresses of her era were forced to endure in silence. According to multiple witnesses, when a male actor groped her on set during the filming of a 1950s Western, McCambridge didn't report him to the director or producer. She handled the situation directly and physically, delivering a sharp knee to his groin followed by a slap that could be heard across the soundstage. Word of the incident spread quickly through Hollywood, and it had a significant impact on how male colleagues approached her. As one cameraman who worked with her later recalled, when she said no, It sounded like a shotgun. Men who routinely harassed other actresses gave McCambridge a wide berth, recognizing that she wasn't a woman who would quietly tolerate abuse. This forceful self-protection extended to her professional relationships as well. McCambridge fought fiercely for proper credit for her work, most famously in the case of The Exorcist, where she provided the demonic voice for the possessed character but was initially left uncredited. When director William Friedkin attempted to minimize her contribution, McCambridge waged a public battle that eventually forced the studio to acknowledge her role in the film's success. What makes McCambridge's toughness particularly interesting is that it coexisted with genuine vulnerability in her personal life. She struggled with alcoholism for many years. Her marriage ended in divorce, and she endured perhaps the most devastating tragedy imaginable when her son and his wife were murdered by his ex-wife in 1987. Through these ordeals, McCambridge displayed a different kind of toughness. Not the combative strength she showed in Hollywood battles, but the quiet resilience of continuing forward despite unimaginable pain. This combination of public ferocity and private resilience made McCambridge a unique figure in Hollywood history, a woman who never achieved the household name status of some of her contemporaries, but who commanded extraordinary respect within the industry itself. Directors knew she would deliver unflinching performances no matter how challenging the material. Fellow actors recognized her as someone who elevated every production through her commitment and craft. In a town built on fakery and facade, Mercedes McCambridge stood as a beacon of unvarnished authenticity, sometimes uncomfortably so for those around her. Her legacy isn't measured in glamorous leading roles or box office records, but in the trail she blazed for actresses who refused to soften their edges or dim their intensity to accommodate Hollywood's narrow expectations of femininity.
Listen, I'm not taking any chances around here after what happened last night.
8. Mae West, the woman who made censors blush. I believe in censorship. I made a fortune out of it. This quintessential Mae West quip reveals the shrewd intelligence behind her seemingly effortless sensuality. Long before Madonna or Lady Gaga deliberately courted controversy, Mae West had perfected the art of turning moral outrage into box office gold. But her breezy one-liners masked a woman of extraordinary determination who didn't just push boundaries, she redefined them entirely. West's toughness was evident from the very beginning of her entertainment career. Breaking into vaudeville as a teenager in the early 1900s, she quickly discovered that female performers were expected to be decorative but not creative, pretty faces reciting lines and performing routines crafted by men. West had different ideas. By her early 20s, she was writing her own material, developing the suggestive persona that would make her famous, and refusing to let male producers dictate her act. This insistence on creative control reached its apex when West moved into playwriting in the 1920s. Her first major play, Sex, 1926, which she wrote, produced, directed, and starred in, was so controversial that New York police raided the theater and arrested West on obscenity charges. She was sentenced to 10 days in jail, a punishment that would have ended many careers. West not only survived the scandal, but leveraged it brilliantly, giving press interviews from her jail cell and emerging more famous than ever. Undeterred, she immediately wrote an even more provocative play, The Drag, which dealt openly with homosexuality, a subject so taboo in the 1920s that the play was banned before it could even open in New York. Again, rather than retreating to safer territory, West pushed forward, writing Diamond Lil, which became her signature stage role and eventually the basis for her film breakthrough. When Hollywood finally came calling in 1932, when West was already 39 years old, practically ancient for a female film debut in that era, she brought the same uncompromising approach to the movie business. In an unprecedented arrangement for a new screen actress, West negotiated the right to rewrite her dialogue, maintaining the double entendres and sexual innuendo that were her trademark. The result, She Done Him Wrong, was a massive hit that is credited with literally saving Paramount Pictures from bankruptcy during the Depression. West's impact on film censorship was so significant that some historians credit, or blame, her for the strengthening of the Motion Picture Production Code, the strict censorship guidelines that governed Hollywood content for decades. Her suggestive dialogue and unapologetic sexuality so alarmed moral guardians that new restrictions were enacted specifically to curb the Mae West problem. Undaunted, West simply became more creative with her innuendo, developing the art of saying provocative things in ways that censors couldn't technically object to. What made West truly remarkable wasn't just her willingness to battle censors, but her insistence on controlling her own image and career in an era when female stars were treated as studio property. She carefully crafted every aspect of her public persona, writing much of her own dialogue, selecting her leading men, usually choosing handsome, younger actors who wouldn't overshadow her, and maintaining ownership of her most successful properties. This control extended to her personal finances as well. Unlike many stars who lived extravagantly and ended up broke, West invested wisely in real estate and other ventures. She maintained her independence by ensuring she would never be economically vulnerable, a lesson learned from watching other actresses become dependent on studios or husbands for financial support. Perhaps most impressively, West maintained her career and her provocative image well into her senior years, continuing to perform and play sexual characters in her 70s and even 80s. When asked about the inappropriateness of playing seductresses at her advanced age, she famously quipped, "I'm not young, I'm not old, I'm ageless." It wasn't just a clever retort, it was a declaration of her refusal to be limited by conventional expectations about women and aging. Throughout her long career, West never backed down from a fight, never apologized for her sexuality, and never compromised her artistic vision. As she once said, "Too much of a good thing can be wonderful, especially when it's power." In an era when women had precious little power in Hollywood or elsewhere, Mae West claimed hers without apology and wielded it with remarkable effectiveness. Her legacy isn't just as a sex symbol or comedienne, but as a woman who recognized that real toughness sometimes wears a smile. As one critic beautifully summarized, she didn't just break the rules, she made the rules blush.
I was in many ways. He was 45.
Yeah.
But I mean, because he had more energy than I did. You know, when you're 20, you're like...
9. Lauren Bacall, the look that launched a legend. When 19-year-old Betty Joan Persk, soon to be known as Lauren Bacall, arrived on the set of To Have and Have Not in 1944, she was terrified. A former model with no acting experience, cast opposite Hollywood titan Humphrey Bogart, she was so nervous that she pressed her chin against her chest to stop her head from shaking, tilting her eyes upward to look at the camera, inadvertently creating the look, the sultry, sidelong glance that would become her trademark. This origin story perfectly captures what made Bacall extraordinary, her ability to transform vulnerability into strength, fear into fearlessness. That same transformation would define her entire career, as the nervous teenager evolved into one of Hollywood's toughest, most resilient women. Bacall's relationship with Bogart, they fell in love during filming and married despite their 25-year age gap, could have easily defined and limited her career. Many actresses who married famous actors found themselves relegated to being so-and-so's wife, their own ambitions secondary to their husbands' established careers. Bacall refused this fate from the beginning. Even while deeply in love with Bogart, she fought to establish herself as a serious actress in her own right. She battled studio head Jack Warner repeatedly, rejecting roles she considered beneath her talents and enduring suspensions without pay rather than appear in substandard films. As she later recalled, "Warner thought he could break me, but he was dealing with Bogart's wife. I'd learned from the master." This reference to learning from Bogart reveals an important aspect of Bacall's toughness, her willingness to absorb lessons from every source available. While many young actresses of her era were content to rely on their beauty and studio guidance, Bacall was constantly studying, observing, and growing. From Bogart, she learned about standing up to studio pressure. From director Howard Hawks, she gained insight into the technical aspects of filmmaking. Even from her own mistakes, she extracted valuable lessons that informed her future choices. Perhaps the most telling example of Bacall's steel came when Bogart was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in 1956. For the next year, while continuing her own career and caring for their 2 young children, she became his primary caregiver, managing his medical care, shielding him from unwanted visitors, and maintaining as normal a home life as possible under the circumstances. Throughout this ordeal, she never publicly displayed the fear and grief she later admitted to feeling, presenting instead a brave face to the world, and especially to Bogart himself. After his death in 1957, the 32-year-old widow faced both personal heartbreak and professional uncertainty. The film industry had changed, with the studio system that launched her career now in decline. Rather than desperately cling to her established screen persona, Bacall once again demonstrated her adaptability and determination by returning to her first love, the theater. Her Broadway debut in Goodbye Charlie received mixed reviews, and a lesser talent might have retreated back to the safety of Hollywood. Bacall persisted, continuing to develop her stage skills. Her determination paid off when she won Tony Awards for Applause and later Woman of the Year, establishing herself as a legitimate theater star at a time when many of her film contemporaries were facing dwindling careers. Throughout these career transitions, Bacall maintained the same straightforward, no-nonsense approach to both her professional and personal life. Her second marriage, to actor Jason Robards, ended in divorce due largely to his alcoholism, a situation she handled with characteristic directness. As she bluntly put it in her autobiography, "I had lived with a brilliant alcoholic, and I had no intention of doing it again." This clarity about her own boundaries was unusual for women of her generation, who were often expected to tolerate substantial dysfunction within their marriages. Equally unusual was Bacall's candor about the challenges of aging in an industry obsessed with youth, particularly for women. Rather than pretending age didn't affect her, or desperately trying to maintain a youthful appearance through surgical intervention, she faced the issue head-on. "I am not a has-been. I am a will-be," she declared in her 70s, continuing to work selectively in films that interested her rather than taking roles out of financial necessity or fear of fading away. This combination of honesty, adaptability, and unwavering self-respect made Bacall a unique figure in Hollywood history. Unlike some stars who became bitter as their youth faded, she continued to evolve as an artist and as a woman, maintaining her dignity and her sharp wit into her 80s. As one director who worked with her late in her career observed, "Sultry? Yes. Submissive? Never." It was an apt summation of a woman who began her career with the look, but ensured she would be remembered for her substance, resilience, and uncompromising strength.
I think it really relates to young people. They like it because it has life, and it's the story is so simple. And
10. Debbie Reynolds, the unsinkable survivor. If Hollywood wrote a script about a star who endured public humiliation, financial ruin, and personal tragedy, yet somehow maintained her bright spirit and comeback ability, critics would dismiss it as unbelievable. Yet that's exactly the story of Debbie Reynolds, whose public image as the perpetually perky girl next door masked a woman of extraordinary resilience and determination. Reynolds' toughness was first tested in the glare of what was then the biggest scandal in Hollywood history. In 1958, her husband, singer Eddie Fisher, left her for Elizabeth Taylor, who happened to be Reynolds' close friend. The betrayal was bad enough. Having it play out in screaming headlines and whispered gossip made it excruciating. Reynolds was not only a young woman dealing with the collapse of her marriage, but also the mother of 2 small children, including daughter Carrie, later Princess Leia of Star Wars fame. At a time when wronged wives were expected to retreat from public view in shame, Reynolds did exactly the opposite. She continued working, making carefully controlled public appearances, and eventually turning the situation into fodder for her nightclub act. While gossip columnists expected her to play the victim, Reynolds gradually shaped a narrative of cheerful resilience that resonated with audiences. As one friend observed, "They knocked her down, and she tap-danced back." This ability to bounce back would be tested repeatedly throughout her career. After her second husband, Harry Carl, gambled away his fortune and most of hers, leaving her approximately $10 million in debt, an astronomical sum, in the 1960s, Reynolds didn't declare bankruptcy as advisors suggested. Instead, she worked relentlessly, accepting any role offered, performing up to 42 weeks a year in Las Vegas and in theaters around the country, and sleeping on friends' couches while maintaining her children in their home. By the late 1970s, she had not only paid off the debts, but saved enough to pursue an extraordinary passion project, preserving Hollywood's heritage. Long before film preservation became fashionable, Reynolds recognized the historical importance of costumes, props, and memorabilia from classic films. Using her own money, she began purchasing important pieces at studio auctions, eventually amassing the world's largest private collection of Hollywood costumes. Her dream was to house this collection in a museum dedicated to Hollywood history. After multiple failed attempts to create such a museum in Hollywood itself, Reynolds purchased a hotel in Las Vegas. where she planned to display the collection while continuing to perform. When this venture failed, leading to another financial setback, Reynolds was forced to auction off the collection she had spent decades building, a heartbreaking personal defeat that she nevertheless faced with characteristic resilience. The final and perhaps most poignant test of Reynolds' toughness came in her relationship with daughter Carrie Fisher. Their bond was complicated by Carrie's bipolar disorder, substance abuse issues, and the unusual dynamic of both mother and daughter being famous in their own right. There were periods of estrangement, public disagreements, and painful misunderstandings. Yet Reynolds never gave up on her daughter, maintaining a relationship that eventually evolved into a close friendship in their later years. In the cruelest of coincidences, Carrie Fisher died on December 27, 2016, after suffering a heart attack on a flight from London to Los Angeles. Reynolds, devastated by her daughter's death, suffered a stroke the very next day while planning Carrie's funeral arrangements. She died hours later at age 84. Her son, Todd Fisher, later said his mother's last words were, "I want to be with Carrie." This tragic end came after a lifetime of displaying a particular kind of toughness that's often overlooked. Not the confrontational strength of a Bette Davis or the steely resolve of a Katharine Hepburn, but the resilient endurance of a woman who repeatedly picked herself up, dusted herself off, and kept moving forward with a smile. In many ways, this quieter form of toughness requires even greater inner strength. Throughout her numerous setbacks, Reynolds maintained the same philosophy. The only way to make it through life is to fight hard, do your best, and hope that you're lucky enough to make it through. It wasn't just a platitude for interviews, it was how she lived her life, facing each new challenge with the same determination she brought to her performances. As her longtime friend and occasional co-star Debbie Allen observed, Debbie never let them see her sweat. No matter what was happening in her life, she showed up ready to work, prepared to the letter, and with enough energy to power the whole production. That takes more strength than people realize. In the final analysis, Reynolds embodied a uniquely American ideal of toughness, not the absence of setbacks, but the refusal to be defined by them. Her legacy isn't just in her films or her iconic performances, but in her demonstration that true strength often wears a smile, even when the cameras aren't rolling.